The emergency voting session had dragged on for 6 hours now, and Representative Ortiz felt his patience wearing thin. The Grand Council chamber buzzed with heated arguments as delegates from 40 different species debated the Drealith Empire's request for military authorization. Ortiz adjusted his position in the mediator's chair, his translucent skin pulsing with stress patterns that any member of his species would recognize as deep concern. Ambassador Tavik stood at the central podium, his reptilian features arranged in what he clearly believed was a diplomatic expression. To Ortiz, it looked more like barely suppressed contempt. The Drealith ambassador gestured at the holographic star map floating above the chamber floor, where human territory glowed in aggressive red highlighting. "The council must understand the severity of this situation," Tavik declared, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of someone who had rehearsed this speech many times. "These humans have expanded into 17 systems in just 40 years. 17. They violate protocols that have governed territorial expansion for millennia." A delegate from the Vorton Collective raised a tentacle. "Ambassador Tavik, the protocols you reference were established 3,000 years before humanity even discovered fire. How can they violate rules they never agreed to follow?" Tavik's scales rippled with irritation. Ignorance of law is no excuse. More importantly, they lack the proper respect for established powers. They treat our diplomatic overtures with casual dismissal. From her seat in the observer section, Lissa of the Centrist Union watched the proceedings with growing unease. Her crystalline body refracted the chamber's cold lighting into scattered rainbow patterns on nearby surfaces. She had reviewed the actual diplomatic transcripts between Earth and the Drealith Empire. The humans had been respectful, even cautious. What Tavik called dismissal was simply humanity refusing to accept Drealith territorial claims that contradicted existing survey data. "I have compiled comprehensive intelligence on human military capability," Tavik continued, bringing up a new series of holographic displays. "As you can see, their technology is primitive by our standards. Their largest warships barely match our light cruisers. Their population centers are concentrated on a single homeworld, making them strategically vulnerable. A limited military action would demonstrate the consequences of their arrogance and bring them into proper compliance with galactic norms." Ortiz studied the intelligence reports floating in the holographic display. Something felt wrong about them. The data seemed too convenient, too perfectly aligned with Tavik's arguments. But challenging a member empire's intelligence without proof would be a serious diplomatic breach. Commander Ravik materialized as a holographic projection beside Tavik. The Drealith military officer wore full ceremonial armor, its polished surface reflecting light like a mirror. "The Drealith Third Fleet stands ready to conduct a proportional response. We will target only military installations in their outer colonies. Civilian casualties will be minimal. The operation will conclude within 72 hours. Several council members nodded approvingly. The Krill delegation actually applauded. Ortiz felt a chill run through his body. This was moving too fast. Standard protocol required 3 months of mediation attempts before military authorization could even be considered. "Representative Ortiz," called out the senior delegate from the Azern Confederacy, "what is the mediator's recommendation?" Ortiz hesitated. If he recommended against authorization, he would be accused of favoritism toward a non-council species. If he recommended approval, he would be enabling what increasingly felt like an act of bullying disguised as law enforcement. "I recommend a 30-day mediation period," Ortiz said carefully. "Allow me to meet with both human and Drealith representatives to find a peaceful resolution." Tavik's laugh echoed through the chamber. 30 days for them to further fortify their illegal positions? Absolutely not. The Drealith Empire has been patient enough. We demand a vote today. The vote was called. Ortiz watched the holographic tally appear above each delegate's station. Green for approval, red for denial, yellow for abstention. The green lights outnumbered red by a ratio of 3 to 1. Article 47 of the Galactic Charter was invoked, authorizing proportional military response to territorial violations. Lissa rose from her seat, her crystalline form chiming softly as she moved. I wish to register formal concern about this authorization. The intelligence presented appears incomplete. Tavik turned to face her, his expression openly contemptuous now that the vote was complete. Your concern is noted and dismissed. The centrist union has no stake in this matter. Every council action sets precedent, Lissa replied quietly. Today we authorize force against a species barely 2 centuries into space travel. Tomorrow, what will that precedent justify? But the chamber was already emptying. The vote was done. Delegates hurried toward exits, eager to file reports with their home governments. Ortiz remained in his chair, reviewing the authorization documents that now bore his official seal as mediator. The legal language was precise. Everything was technically correct. Yet every instinct in his body screamed that something terrible had just been set in motion. 2 days later, Ortiz stood in his private office watching holographic news feeds from across the galaxy. The Draelith Third Fleet had departed from their home system with great fanfare. Ravik had given an interview to military correspondents, predicting a swift and decisive operation that would establish proper respect for Draelith authority. The human diplomatic mission to the council had closed its offices that morning. The ambassador, a woman named Rodriguez, had transmitted a brief message before departing. We came to you in peace, seeking only fair treatment under your laws. You have chosen to answer us with violence against our people. Remember this moment. Remember that you made this choice. Ortiz had tried to contact Rodriguez, but she was already gone. Earth's embassy stood empty, its doors sealed, its communication systems shut down. It reminded him of something his grandfather had once said about predators and prey. The most dangerous moment is not when prey runs away. It is when prey stops running and turns to face you. Across the galaxy, the Draelith Third Fleet entered hyperspace, heading toward humanity's outer colonies. In their wake, they left celebrations and propaganda broadcasts. Commander Ravik addressed his fleet with confident predictions of glory. Ambassador Tavik gave interviews about restoring proper galactic order. And on Earth, in command centers buried deep beneath continents and oceans, quiet orders were transmitted to fleet staging areas that Draelith intelligence had never detected. Admiral Reeves reviewed tactical plans that had been prepared for exactly this scenario. The plans had names like Steel Response and Broken Pride. They were not defensive plans. They were not proportional plans. They were annihilation protocols, designed by a species that had survived ice ages, world wars, and nuclear brinkmanship. The galaxy was about to learn a lesson. Pride and arrogance were not uniquely human failings, but humanity had learned, through bitter experience, exactly what those failings cost. Titan Station had been home to 12,000 people for the past 15 years. Miners, engineers, scientists, families. They had carved out a life in the shadow of Saturn's largest moon, extracting rare minerals from beneath the frozen surface. The station itself was a marvel of human engineering, a sprawling complex of interconnected modules that spun slowly to provide artificial gravity. Director Walsh had been reviewing quarterly production reports when the first alarm sounded. After 30 years in space, she knew the difference between routine alerts and genuine emergencies. This was the latter. Unknown vessels entering sensor range, her communications officer reported, his voice tight with tension. Configuration matches Draelith military signatures, counting 240 ships. Walsh felt her stomach drop. 240 warships. For a mining station with a dozen patrol craft and some automated defense drones. This was not a border dispute. This was an execution. Sound evacuation alert, she ordered, keeping her voice calm despite the fear clawing at her chest. All civilians to transport ships immediately. Send distress signal to Earth and all nearby stations. The evacuation alarm echoed through Titan Station's corridors. Families grabbed emergency packs and rushed toward designated assembly points. Parents carried children. The elderly were helped by younger neighbors. The drills they had practiced monthly were finally being used for real. On the command deck, Walsh watched her tactical display as civilian transports began launching. 60 ships total. They could carry everyone if they packed in tight. The defense drones activated automatically, forming a pitiful screen between the station and the approaching Drelith fleet. Then a communication signal forced itself onto every screen in the station. Commander Ravik appeared, his ceremonial armor gleaming, his expression radiating superiority. Human presence in this system constitutes a violation of Drelith territorial claims, Ravik announced. You have 20 minutes to power down all systems and prepare for occupation. Resistance will be met with immediate destruction. Walsh stabbed the reply button. This is Director Walsh. We are a civilian mining operation. We are evacuating non-essential personnel. We will discuss territorial claims after our people are safe. Ravik's laugh was cold. You have 15 minutes now. Choose quickly. The civilian transports continued launching. Walsh watched the counter, 43 ships away, 17 still loading. The Drelith fleet was not moving to intercept. They simply waited, weapons powered but not yet firing. Maybe they would actually allow the evacuation. Maybe this was just intimidation. All transports away in 4 minutes, her operations chief reported. We are going to make it. Walsh allowed herself a moment of hope. Then she saw the Drelith weapons arrays beginning to glow with purple energy. They are targeting the transports, her tactical officer said, disbelief in his voice. Sir, they are targeting the civilian ships. Broadcast surrender, Walsh shouted. All channels, we surrender. Cease fire, we surrender. The Drelith weapons fired. Purple energy beams lanced across space, beautiful and terrible. 3 civilian transports, still accelerating away from the station, exploded in silent fireballs. Then 3 more. The defense drones tried to intercept, but they were swatted aside like insects. Walsh stood frozen, watching people she knew die on her tactical display. The Harris family on Transport 7, Dr. Chen and his research team on Transport 12, the kindergarten class that had performed a play just last week, all aboard Transport 15. Gone. All gone. The firing stopped. 9 transports destroyed, 3,000 dead. The remaining ships scattered in panic, fleeing in different directions. The Drelith fleet did not pursue them. Ravik appeared on screen again. Resistance was foolish, he said. The station will now be occupied. All remaining personnel will be processed as prisoners of war. Walsh did not respond. She was watching the casualty list scroll across her screen. Names, ages, every single one a person she had known. The chief engineer's daughter was on that list. She was 7 years old. The footage was transmitted automatically to Earth. Every human station, colony, and settlement received it within hours. The images spread across human networks. 3,000 civilians killed while fleeing. Children, families, teachers, engineers, murdered as a demonstration of power. In Geneva, the UN Security Council convened in their war room deep beneath the city. Representatives from every nation watched the footage in silence. Some wept. Others sat with faces carved from stone. Admiral Reeves did not show emotion. He had learned long ago that rage was useless unless it could be channeled into action. He had prepared for this possibility. Humanity had been in space for less than 2 centuries, but they were not naive. Every species they encountered had thousands of years of spacefaring history. The galaxy was not kind to the weak. The Drelith have committed an act of war against civilian targets, Reeves stated. Under Article 51 of our charter, Earth has the right to defend itself. I am requesting authorization for full military response. The vote was unanimous. Every representative transmitted their authorization code. Reeves accepted each one, feeling the weight of what was about to happen. This was not a border skirmish. This was not a limited engagement. The Drelith had killed 3,000 civilians to prove a point. Humanity was about to respond with everything they had. Activate all fleet elements, Reeves ordered. Recall all diplomatic personnel from Council space. Issue evacuation warnings to all civilian vessels. Authorization code, broken pride, execute. Across human space, the order was received. Fleet elements that the Draelith believed did not exist began moving toward staging positions. Ships that had been running silent for years powered up their reactors. Bases hidden in asteroid fields and gas giant atmospheres activated their defenses. The industrial capacity of 8 billion humans turned toward a single purpose. The Draelith had demonstrated their military doctrine: overwhelming force, casual cruelty, victory through intimidation. They expected humans to respond according to galactic norms, negotiate, protest to the Council, accept a peace treaty that favored the aggressor. But humanity had different norms. Humanity remembered when nations had thought conventional warfare was civilized, when rules of engagement meant something, when treaties were respected. They also remembered what happened when those norms were violated. They remembered total war. They remembered what it meant to face extinction and choose to fight back with everything available. The Draelith Third Fleet celebrated their victory at Titan Station. They posted triumphant messages across galactic networks. They had proven human weakness. They had demonstrated Draelith superiority. Commander Ravik gave interviews about the successful operation. They had 3 days before humanity arrived. 3 days of celebration before they learned what they had actually done. They had not demonstrated superiority. They had removed any reason for humanity to show restraint. Intelligence reports flooded into Commander Ravik's tactical center aboard the Pride of Draelith. The reports were concerning but not alarming. Human fleet elements were moving. Patrol groups had broken off from their normal routes. Communications traffic had increased significantly across all human networks. They are mobilizing for a counterattack, his tactical officer observed. Estimated force composition suggests 3, perhaps 4 battle groups. Ravik studied the projections with satisfaction. 4 battle groups, against his Third Fleet plus the Second and Fourth Fleets that were already en route to reinforce him. The humans were going to make a stand. Excellent. A proper military defeat would cement Draelith dominance far more effectively than the Titan Station operation. Deploy screening elements near Jupiter, Ravik ordered. When the humans arrive, we want detailed scans of their ship capabilities. Let them think they have a chance before we crush them. The Draelith Second and Fourth Fleets arrived 2 days later, bringing total forces to nearly 700 warships. Ravik held a briefing for all flag officers, his confidence radiating through the holographic conference. The humans will come to us, he explained, highlighting the Jupiter system on the tactical display. Pride will force them to defend their inner system. We will meet them here, destroy their fleet, and then dictate terms directly to Earth. The Council authorized proportional response. We are going to exceed that authorization and dare them to complain about it. Laughter echoed through the conference. The assembled Draelith commanders shared Ravik's contempt for human capabilities. Every intelligence assessment supported their confidence. Human ships were smaller. Human weapons had shorter range. Humans had been in space for barely 2 centuries. This would be a massacre. Near Jupiter, a small human force appeared exactly where Ravik had predicted. 15 ships, arranged in a defensive formation near Europa. They broadcast a challenge on all frequencies, demanding the Draelith withdraw from human space. Predictable, Ravik muttered. All fleets advance, maintain formation. I want those ships disabled and captured if possible, trophy vessels for our triumph. The combined Draelith armada moved forward, weapons charged, sensors active. The human ships held position, not fleeing, not advancing, just waiting. Ravik felt a moment of doubt. Why were they not running? 15 ships against 700. It made no tactical sense. All vessels weapons free, Ravik commanded. Fire at will. The Draelith fleet opened fire. Purple energy beams and plasma torpedoes crossed the distance toward the human ships. Point defense lasers from the human vessels intercepted most of the incoming fire. The few hits that connected splashed against energy shields that seemed far more robust than intelligence had suggested. Then space behind Europa and Ganymede erupted with new contacts. Dozens of ships, hundreds of ships, sleek vessels painted matte black, their hulls bristling with weapons that intelligence data had never documented. The human reinforcements did not announce themselves. They simply appeared and began firing. Ravik's tactical display became a nightmare of red warnings. Kinetic rounds traveling at significant fractions of light speed punched through Drelith shields like they were paper. Electromagnetic pulse weapons washed across entire formations, frying electronics and leaving ships dead in space. Missiles that maneuvered like living things hunted down targets with terrifying persistence. "Return fire," Ravik shouted. "All ships return fire." The Drelith fleet tried to respond, but the humans had ambushed them perfectly. The initial picket force had not been a defensive line. It had been bait. The real attack came from three directions simultaneously, catching the Drelith in a kill box that military tacticians would study for generations. A Drelith dreadnought to port exploded, its reactor breaching in a flash that briefly outshone Jupiter itself. Two cruisers were cut in half by sustained railgun fire. A carrier group tried to launch fighters, but human point defense created a web of laser fire that destroyed the small craft before they could form up. "They are jamming our communications," his communications officer reported, panic clear in her voice. "I cannot coordinate with Second Fleet." Ravik watched his tactical display with growing horror. The numerical advantage meant nothing. The Drelith ships were larger, but the human vessels moved with frightening agility. Every human ship seemed to know exactly where to be, exactly when to fire. Their formations flowed like water, never presenting vulnerable flanks, always maintaining overlapping fields of fire. "All ships emergency jump," Ravik ordered. "Retreat to fallback position." But the humans had planned for that too. Gravity well generators activated sophisticated pieces of technology that Drelith intelligence had insisted humans did not possess. Jump drives refused to engage within their influence. The Drelith fleet was trapped. The battle lasted 4 hours. 4 hours of systematic destruction. The humans did not grandstand. They did not broadcast threats or demands. They simply executed their battle plan with mechanical efficiency. When Drelith ships tried to surrender, the humans accepted, directing them to designated holding areas. When ships tried to fight, they were destroyed. By the time it ended, the Drelith had lost 60% of their combined fleet. 420 warships destroyed or disabled. Thousands of crew dead. The survivors, including Ravik's flagship, were surrounded by human vessels that kept weapons locked but held fire. Boarding craft approached the Pride of Drelith. Ravik considered ordering his crew to fight, but what was the point? They had lost. Completely. Absolutely. The inferior humans had crushed 3 Drelith fleets in a single afternoon. Human marines breached the bridge. They moved with professional efficiency, weapons ready but not firing unnecessarily. The lead marine, a woman with lieutenant insignia on her armor, approached Ravik directly. "Commander Ravik, you are under arrest for war crimes," she stated. "Specifically, the murder of 3,000 civilians at Titan Station." Ravik wanted to argue, to claim military necessity, to demand respect for his rank, but the words died in his throat. Through the damaged viewport of his bridge, he could see the wreckage of his fleet drifting in space. The Pride of Drelith, the symbol of his people's military supremacy, was a broken shell. A holographic transmission activated on one of the few functioning screens. Admiral Reeves appeared, his expression hard as stone. "You attacked our civilians," Reeves said quietly. "You killed 3,000 people to prove a point. Now you face the consequences. Your people wanted to teach humanity our place in the galaxy. Let me teach you something instead. We are not prey, we are not victims, and we do not forget." The transmission ended. The human Marines secured the Drealith bridge crew and began processing them as prisoners. Ravik slumped in his command chair, his ceremonial armor scorched and damaged, his pride shattered as completely as his fleet. Across the galaxy, the Galactic Council was receiving distress signals from the Drealith Empire. The signals painted an impossible picture. The humans, the species that was supposed to be easily defeated, had destroyed a force of 700 warships, and they were not stopping. Long-range sensors detected human fleets moving toward the Drealith home system. The Council had authorized a limited operation. They were about to discover that humanity did not recognize the concept of limited war, not when civilians were murdered, not when the aggressor showed such casual cruelty. The Council had made a choice. Now they would learn what that choice cost. The Grand Council chamber had never been this chaotic. Representatives shouted over each other, while holographic displays showed the devastation of 3 Drealith fleets in brutal detail. Representative Ortiz tried to maintain order, but his voice was lost in the pandemonium. Ambassador Tavik stood at his station, his scales pale with fear, demanding immediate council intervention. "You must stop this human aggression. They have violated every principle of proportional response. They are war criminals." Lissa rose from her seat, her crystalline body chiming with barely contained fury. "War criminals. Shall we review the footage from Titan Station again? Shall we watch 3,000 civilians die while trying to evacuate?" She activated a holographic projection. The Council fell silent as they watched the Drealith Third Fleet deliberately targeting civilian transports. Children's faces were visible through viewport windows in the moment before purple energy beams turned their ships into expanding clouds of debris. "You authorized this," Lissa said, her voice cutting through the silence. "Every member who voted for military action shares responsibility for those deaths. The Drealith asked for permission to commit murder, and you gave it to them." A delegate from the Azern Confederacy attempted a defense. "We authorized proportional response to territorial violations. We did not authorize attacks on civilians." "Then you are fools," Lissa replied. "You handed weapons to bullies and expected them to show restraint. The humans are not violating proportional response. They are responding proportionally. 3,000 of their civilians died. The Drealith are paying the price." Ortiz finally managed to restore some order. "The immediate question is what action the Council takes now. The humans have severed all diplomatic contact. Our attempts to negotiate a ceasefire have been ignored. Long-range sensors indicate human fleets are heading directly toward Drealith Prime." The implications of that statement rippled through the chamber. Drealith Prime, the homeworld. The humans were not going to settle for destroying military forces in deep space. They were taking the war to the Empire's heart. Emperor Vorusk appeared via holographic transmission from his orbital palace. The ancient Drealith ruler wore full imperial regalia, his ceremonial robes heavy with precious metals and jewels. But his voice carried an edge of desperation that undercut his regal appearance. "The Council must honor its commitments to member species," Vorusk demanded. "The Drealith Empire requires immediate military assistance against human aggression. We invoke Article 23, Collective Defense Protocols." Silence greeted this demand. Several delegates suddenly found their data screens very interesting. The Krill delegation, who had applauded the initial authorization, were conspicuously absent from the chamber. Ortiz pulled up Article 23 on the main display. Collective defense protocols apply when a member species faces unprovoked attack. The legal question is whether human action qualifies as unprovoked given the Titan Station incident. "This is a debate for lawyers while my people face annihilation," Vorusk shouted. "I demand action now." Lissa accessed her own files and projected them for the entire council to see. "Before we discuss military intervention, perhaps we should review some other information. These are intelligence assessments of human military capability from the past 5 years. Notice anything interesting." The council members studied the data. Gradually, expressions of confusion turned to alarm, then to horror. Every major intelligence service had rated humanity as a minor threat. Every assessment had concluded that human technology lagged behind galactic standards. Every projection had estimated human military forces at a fraction of their actual strength. "How is this possible?" asked a delegate from the Vorton Collective. "Our intelligence services are the finest in the galaxy." "Because you saw what you expected to see," Lissa explained. "A young species, short spacefaring history, limited industrial base. You made assumptions and never questioned them. Meanwhile, the humans were building distributed shipyards in asteroid fields, training fleets in deep space where your sensors would never detect them, preparing for exactly this scenario." More data appeared on the displays. Human defensive networks that had been invisible to galactic sensors. Military production facilities that dwarfed anything intelligence services had estimated. Fleet compositions that revealed humans had been preparing for major conflict since their first contact with other species. "They were planning to attack us all along," Tavik claimed desperately. "No," Ortiz said quietly. "They were planning for someone to attack them. They have been in space for less than 2 centuries. In that time, they have encountered 43 different species. 31 of those species initially responded to human contact with hostility or threats. The humans learned to prepare for the worst, and you just gave them the worst." Another holographic transmission interrupted the debate. The image was rough, clearly sent via emergency channels. It showed orbital space above Dralith Prime. The planet itself was beautiful, with purple oceans and golden continents visible below. Above it, the Dralith home defense fleet was forming up. 200 warships, the last major military force the Empire possessed. Then the human fleet arrived. It was not the scattered battle groups that had destroyed the Dralith fleets at Jupiter. This was something else entirely. A coordinated armada of over 300 vessels, their formation perfect, their approach methodical and terrifying. Admiral Reeves broadcast on all frequencies. His message was simple. "Emperor Vorusk, you have 2 choices. Unconditional surrender or we begin orbital bombardment. You have 1 hour to decide." The transmission from Dralith Prime cut off. The council chamber fell into stunned silence. Orbital bombardment of a homeworld. It was the ultimate atrocity, the one act that the entire galaxy had collectively agreed was beyond acceptable behavior even in total war. Lissa broke the silence. "He will not do it. Look at their weapons deployment." She enhanced the tactical display, highlighting the human fleet's positions. Every ship had weapons locked on military targets, orbital defense platforms, military shipyards, weapons satellites, communication arrays. Not one ship had targeting solutions on civilian population centers. "They are giving Vorusk a choice," Lissa explained. "Surrender and the Empire survives. Fight and only the military dies. They are being more merciful than we were. We authorized the Dralith to attack civilian miners. The humans are offering terms that spare civilian populations." The hour passed. Emperor Vorusk refused to surrender. Pride would not allow it. The Dralith home defense fleet opened fire on the approaching human armada. The human response was systematic and devastating. Orbital defense platforms exploded in precise sequence. Military shipyards were reduced to expanding debris clouds. Weapons satellites simply ceased to exist. The home defense fleet tried to fight, but they were outmatched just as badly as the fleets at Jupiter had been. 18 hours later, it was over. 90% of Dralith military capability had been eliminated. Not a single shot had been fired at civilian targets. Cities on Dralith Prime remained pristine and untouched, but every military installation in orbit was destroyed. Every warship was either debris or surrendering. The Council watched it happen in real time. They watched humans demonstrate that they possessed both the capability and restraint to destroy an empire's military while sparing its civilians. It was a lesson in the difference between power and cruelty. The Dralith had shown cruelty. The humans showed power. Emperor Vorusk appeared one final time, broadcasting from his orbital palace as human ships surrounded it. His ceremonial robe seemed heavy now, his regal bearing cracked. "I surrender," he said simply. "Unconditional surrender of all Draelith military forces. We accept responsibility for initiating this conflict." The transmission ended. The council sat in silence, contemplating what they had witnessed. They had authorized a military action based on faulty intelligence and arrogant assumptions. They had enabled the murder of 3,000 civilians. And now they faced the consequences of their choices just as surely as the Draelith did. Because the humans were not done, their fleets remained in Draelith space, but their ambassadors had not returned to Council space. Earth's communication with the Council remained severed. The message was clear. Humanity would not forgive, would not forget, and would not trust the Council's judgment again. The Draelith Military Command Center had been built to coordinate an empire's forces across dozens of systems. Now it served as headquarters for human occupation forces. Admiral Reeves had chosen it deliberately. The message was clear. Everything the Draelith had built to project power now served humanity's purposes. Former Counselor Verath sat across from Reeves, flanked by two other Draelith civilians who had opposed Emperor Vorusk's military adventurism. Verath was elderly for his species. His scales faded to a pale gray, but his eyes were sharp with intelligence. "The occupation terms are generous," Verath admitted, reviewing the documents on his data pad. "More generous than my people deserve." "They are practical," Reeves corrected. "We did not come here to rule your people. We came here to ensure this never happens again." Outside the command center windows, Draelith civilians moved through the streets under the watchful eyes of human soldiers. But the soldiers were not oppressors. They helped elderly Draelith carry supplies. They directed traffic. They operated medical aid stations that treated wounded from the orbital battle without asking whether the wounded had been military or civilian. Verath gestured toward the windows. "My people do not understand this. They were taught that military victory meant domination, conquest. But your soldiers give our children candy bars and help repair damaged buildings. It makes no sense to them." "It makes perfect sense," Reeves replied. "We are not at war with the Draelith people. We are at war with the system that allowed your leadership to murder civilians and expect no consequences." A holographic display activated, showing the Galactic Council chamber. Representative Ortiz was presenting evidence to the assembled delegates. Video footage showed Ambassador Tavik accepting financial transfers from Emperor Vorusk's personal accounts. Communication records revealed that Tavik had deliberately falsified intelligence reports to make humans appear weaker than they were. "Council member Tavik has been arrested by his own government," Verath noted. "Emperor Vorusk has abdicated. 3 other council members have resigned in disgrace. Your people have destroyed more than our military. You have exposed the corruption at the heart of galactic governance." Reeves watched the council proceedings with grim satisfaction. Lissa was methodically presenting a decade of evidence showing systematic discrimination against newer species. The council had operated on the assumption that age equaled wisdom, that species with longer spacefaring history deserved more respect and consideration. That assumption was being torn apart by hard data showing repeated failures of judgment. A human medic entered the command center, escorting a young Draelith civilian. The child's arm was in a medical cast, her scales bandaged. She looked up at Reeves with wide, frightened eyes. "Admiral," the medic said, "this is Sala. Her mother was injured in the orbital battle. We have her stabilized, but she is asking to see her daughter." Reeves knelt down to be at eye level with the child. "Sala, we are going to take you to your mother right now. The doctors have fixed her injuries. She will be okay." Sala's fear began to fade, replaced by confusion. "But you are the enemy. My teacher said humans were monsters." "Your teacher was wrong," Reeves said gently. "We are not your enemy. We are just people like you and your mother. We do not hurt children. We do not hurt families. We only fight people who try to hurt us first. The medic led Sala away toward the medical center. Verath watched the interaction with an unreadable expression. "You are making this very difficult," he said finally. "Making what difficult?" "Hating you. My people need someone to blame for our humiliation. But how can we hate an enemy that treats our wounded, feeds our hungry, and speaks kindly to our children? Your brutality would be easier to accept than your mercy." Reeves turned back to face the elderly Dralith. "Mercy is not weakness. It is a choice we make because we can afford to make it. We destroyed your military because it threatened our civilians. But your civilians never threatened anyone. Why would we harm them?" Another transmission arrived from the council. This one was from Lissa and Ortiz jointly. They had resigned from the council and were proposing a new alliance structure. The Independent Systems Alliance. A governing body with transparent intelligence sharing, strict prohibitions on preemptive military action, and equal representation regardless of how long a species had been spacefaring. "They want you to join," Verath observed. "The new alliance, it needs humanity's credibility to succeed." "Earth will not join the council," Reeves stated firmly. "We made that clear." "But this is not the council. This is something new, something better perhaps, and your people would have significant influence in shaping its structure." Reeves considered the proposal carefully. The new alliance charter addressed many of Earth's concerns. Transparent intelligence sharing would prevent the kind of faulty assessments that had enabled the Dralith attack. Strict military protocols would require extensive mediation before authorizing force. Equal representation would give newer species voices equal to ancient empires. "I will forward this to our government," Reeves said. "But Earth's participation comes with conditions. Full investigation of every council member who voted for military authorization, prosecution of those who accepted bribes or falsified intelligence, and the Dralith participate in the alliance as probationary members only." Verath smiled, a complex expression on Dralith features. "We expected nothing less. My people attacked you out of pride. The council enabled us out of corruption and prejudice. Now we all face the consequences of those choices. Some consequences are punishment, like our military defeat, but some consequences are opportunities. Perhaps this new alliance is both." 3 months after the surrender, the human occupation was ending. Not because the occupation had failed, but because it had succeeded. The Dralith civilian government was stable. War crimes tribunals were processing military officers who had participated in the Titan Station massacre. Reconstruction of civilian infrastructure was ahead of schedule. A young Dralith engineer named Solis worked alongside human technicians repairing a communications array. His grandfather had served in the Home Defense Fleet and died in the orbital battle. Solis had every reason to hate these humans. Instead, he found himself learning from them. "Why do you help us?" he asked the human technician, a woman named Park who had patiently taught him advanced repair techniques all week. Park looked up from her work. "Because this is what you do after a war ends. You help people rebuild. You make sure they have food and medicine and working infrastructure. You give them a reason to choose peace next time." "But we started the war. We killed your people." "Your leaders started the war," Park corrected. "You are just a kid trying to build a future. That is not something I want to punish. That is something I want to help." Across Dralith space, similar scenes were repeated thousands of times. Human personnel worked alongside Dralith civilians. Medical teams trained local doctors in advanced techniques. Engineers shared knowledge freely. It was not occupation in the traditional sense. It was rehabilitation, rebuilding not just infrastructure but trust. The Galactic Council, meanwhile, was collapsing. 6 more members had resigned. Corruption investigations revealed that the rot went deeper than anyone had suspected. Trade agreements that favored ancient species. Intelligence sharing that deliberately excluded newer civilizations. Military authorizations granted based on bribes rather than legal merit. Ortiz presented his final report to the remaining council members. This institution has failed in its fundamental purpose. It was supposed to maintain peace and facilitate cooperation. Instead, it became a tool for established powers to maintain their dominance. The Independent Systems Alliance offers a chance to start over, to build something better, but only if we have the courage to admit our failures. The vote to dissolve the old council was not unanimous, but the majority was clear. Ancient species that had dominated galactic politics for millennia watched their power structure crumble. Some raged. Some plotted to undermine the new alliance. But many, like Ordes and Lyssa, recognized that the old system had been broken long before humanity exposed its failures. The new alliance charter was ratified by 47 species in its first month. The Draelith applied for probationary membership, accepting all conditions including war crimes prosecutions and military limitations. Earth joined as a founding member, bringing their technological capabilities and hard-won wisdom about the costs of war. In the ruins of the old order, something new was being built. Not perfect, not without challenges, but honest in ways the old council never was. The Draelith had attacked for pride. The council had failed through corruption. Now both faced consequences that were simultaneously punishment and opportunity. The galaxy was learning a lesson that humanity had learned through bitter experience. The greatest danger is not external enemies. It is the internal failures of judgment, character, and wisdom that enable atrocity in the first place. The neutral station had been constructed specifically for this moment. Neither council territory nor human space, it orbited a star system claimed by no one. The conference hall was simple, functional, stripped of the grandeur that had characterized the old council chamber. That simplicity was intentional. This was not about ceremony. This was about building something real. Ambassador Rodriguez entered the hall with a small delegation. Admiral Reeves walked beside her, no longer in combat uniform but in formal diplomatic dress. Behind them came representatives from Earth's various continental governments. The message was clear. Humanity was not sending one voice. They were sending many because that is how decisions should be made. The hall was already filling with delegates from dozens of species. Ordes and Lyssa had worked tirelessly to organize this first formal assembly of the Independent Systems Alliance. Younger species sent their ambassadors with hope visible on features both familiar and alien. Established species sent representatives with skepticism and calculation in their bearing. Emperor Vorusk's replacement, a civilian administrator named Teles, sat with the Draelith delegation in a section specifically marked for probationary members. Teles wore simple robes, not imperial regalia. The Draelith who accompanied him were scholars and engineers, not military commanders. The old council had sent observers. They sat in a separate gallery, their presence tolerated but not welcomed. Among them were several delegates who had voted to authorize the Draelith attack. Their expressions ranged from defiant to ashamed. Lyssa called the assembly to order. Her crystalline form caught the light, creating rainbows across the hall's walls. We gather today not to celebrate victory or mourn defeat, but to build something better than what we had. The old system failed because it prioritized power over justice, age over wisdom, and tradition over truth. The Independent Systems Alliance will succeed because we choose different priorities. Rodriguez stood when invited to address the assembly. She took a moment to look around the hall, making eye contact with delegates from species she had never met, worlds she had never visited. This was the moment that would define humanity's place in the galaxy for generations. Earth was invited to join the Galactic Council, Rodriguez began. We were offered a seat at the table of power. We declined. Not because we are ungrateful, but because we cannot trust a system that enabled the murder of our civilians and then acted surprised when we defended ourselves. Murmurs rippled through the hall. Some delegates nodded agreement. Others shifted uncomfortably. The council operates on assumptions that seem reasonable until you examine them closely, Rodriguez continued. Older species deserve more respect. Longer spacefaring history means greater wisdom. Newer civilizations should defer to established powers. These assumptions led directly to the deaths of 3,000 human civilians at Titan Station, because the Draelith believed their ancient lineage gave them the right to dictate our territorial boundaries, because the Council believed our youth made our concerns less important. She activated a holographic display showing the charter of the Independent Systems Alliance. This charter rejects those assumptions. Every species has equal voice regardless of age. Intelligence is shared transparently, so no one makes decisions based on deliberate lies. Military action requires extensive mediation and can only be authorized when all peaceful options are exhausted. And most importantly, those who violate these principles face real consequences. Teles rose from the Draelith delegation. Ambassador Rodriguez, the Draelith Empire formally requests probationary membership in the Independent Systems Alliance. We accept all conditions including war crimes prosecutions, military limitations, and oversight of our territorial claims. We cannot undo the harm we caused, but we can work to ensure it never happens again. Rodriguez nodded acknowledgement. Earth supports Draelith probationary membership, not because we forgive what your previous government did. We will never forget our dead, but we recognize that your civilian population and new leadership had no part in those crimes. Justice means holding the guilty accountable, not punishing the innocent. The vote on Draelith membership was called. It passed with significant majority. Some species voted no, unable to move past recent events, but enough voted yes to send a clear message. The new alliance valued redemption as well as accountability. Over the next hours, the Assembly ratified the alliance structure, transparent intelligence sharing protocols, strict limits on military authorization, economic cooperation based on mutual benefit rather than dominance, dispute resolution through mediation rather than force. Each provision addressed a specific failure of the old council system. An observer from the council requested permission to speak. The ambassador from the Azern Confederacy, one of the species that had voted to authorize Draelith military action, stood with visible difficulty. The council made terrible mistakes, the Azern admitted. We enabled atrocity through corruption, prejudice, and lazy assumptions. Some of my colleagues refuse to acknowledge this. They plot to undermine your alliance. They believe the old order can be restored, but I am here to say they are wrong. The council is finished, not because you destroyed it with military force, but because we destroyed it through our failures of character and judgment. The Azern paused, gathering courage for what came next. The Azern Confederacy formally withdraws from the Galactic Council and requests membership in the Independent Systems Alliance. We will accept any probationary conditions you deem appropriate. Silence filled the hall. Then Lissa began the crystalline chiming that was her species' form of applause. Ortiz joined her, his translucent skin pulsing with colors that signified approval. Within moments, the entire hall echoed with the sounds of dozens of different species expressing support. The old council was not just failing. It was being actively abandoned by its own members. Species were voting with their allegiances, choosing reform over tradition. The assembly continued for 3 days. 47 species joined as full members. 8 more, including the Draelith, joined as probationary members with conditions tailored to their specific situations. The structure that emerged was messy, complicated, full of compromises that satisfied no one completely. It was also honest, transparent, and accountable in ways the old council had never been. On the final day, Rodriguez stood with Reeves overlooking the station's observation deck. Below them, delegates from dozens of species mingled, forming the connections that would become the foundation of the new alliance. "We did not want this," Rodriguez said quietly. "Earth would have been happy to remain a quiet member of galactic civilization. Mine resources, conduct science, explore new worlds. Instead, we had to fight a war and rebuild galactic governance." "The galaxy forced our hand," Reeves agreed. "They attacked our civilians, expecting us to accept it as the price of being young and weak. They learned we are neither young enough nor weak enough to accept such treatment." Do you think it will work, this alliance? Reeves considered the question carefully. It will work better than what came before. That is a low bar, but it is a start. Some species will resist. Some will try to recreate the old power structures. But enough species are committed to making this succeed that I believe they will overcome that resistance. Below them, a human diplomat shared a meal with a Draelith scholar. A few tables away, Lissa discussed trade agreements with representatives from 3 different species. Ordes facilitated a debate between 2 civilizations that had been rivals for centuries, helping them find common ground. The Draelith had attacked for pride, believing their ancient heritage gave them the right to dominate newer species. The Council had enabled that attack through corruption, prejudice, and willful blindness to their own failures. Both had faced consequences that were simultaneously punishment and opportunity. 3,000 humans had died at Titan Station. That debt could never be fully repaid, but their deaths had exposed failures that might have caused millions more deaths if left unchecked. The galaxy had been operating on faulty assumptions about power, wisdom, and justice. Those assumptions had been shattered by humanity's response. Now came the hard work of building something better, not perfect, never perfect, but honest enough to acknowledge failures, strong enough to hold the powerful accountable, wise enough to learn from tragedy rather than repeating it. Rodriguez watched the delegates below and allowed herself a moment of cautious optimism. Humanity had not sought galactic leadership, but when forced to choose between accepting injustice and demanding something better, they had chosen the harder path. That choice would define not just humanity's future, but the future of every species that chose to build this new alliance together. The age of casual cruelty was ending. The age of assumed superiority was over. Something new was beginning. It would have growing pains. It would face challenges. But it would be built on a foundation of accountability and truth rather than corruption and prejudice. That was worth the cost. That was worth the fight. And that was the real consequence of what the Draelith had started. They had attacked for pride. The Council had failed through corruption. And together, they had forced the galaxy to finally face the truth about itself and choose to become something better.